there was a moment where I was like, I'm not sure what the next step is. Forget the job and think about when I wake up, what am I excited about doing? And starting to be more intentional about speaking about that. For all of you listening, there may be different things that motivate you. And, it's just sort of knowing those things. It's easy to get sucked into just doing a lot of things. But if you're not deriving joy from it, then you're just doing a lot of things. Because I think it's a good one to always think about your strengths and really how do you add to something instead of trying to fit into something. You want to walk in on that first day or that time you accept that offer and say, wow, you've been waiting for me and me specifically. And you know who I am, and I'm going to be excited to tell you more about what I can do. Hi there, this is Ara Tucker, and you're listening to Dreams and Drive.
This episode of Dreams and Drive is brought to you by Olay Body. I'm loving the Olay Body Exfoliating and Moisturizing Body Wash because you don't have to worry about that oily coated feeling or harsh feeling exfoliation because this body wash rinses off clean and is gentle enough for everyday use. Olay Body, fearless in my skin. Hey Dream Drivers, I am super excited for you all to hear from today's guest, Ara Tucker, who is a strategist, thought leader, brand ambassador, communicator, operational expert, and trusted advisor. We're going to be diving into Ara's dream driving journey, aka her career journey, and what it was like going from graduating Princeton to getting her JD from NYU School of Law. And then we're going to go along her corporate journey and how she found herself in the diversity and inclusion space and eventually landed her current role as an SVP of Talent and Culture at Audible. Ara is going to take us into her approach to finding the next opportunity and what that looked like for her. But what I love about Ara, she also is a creative. She's an alumna of the prestigious Bread Loaf Writers Conference and is an avid creative writer. She also is a role model for work-life integration and maintains an active creative writing practice, writing about what happens when art, culture, family, and identity collide. Throughout the course of her career, she has been recognized for her unique contributions to the corporate landscape. She loves using the power of LinkedIn and other platforms, including her personal website, to provide greater visibility to her journey as an openly gay Black woman in the hopes of encouraging and inspiring others. There's a lot that we discuss in this episode, including the intersections of play and possibility, how we can think about our strengths when we're looking for the next job or the next opportunity, what it means to be ready when you receive the call, why taking risk is important, and how to find time for yourself and creative interests. And last but not least, this is one that I think we all need to hear, is why it's good to forget balance and instead focus on happiness. So if you guys are ready for this episode, make sure that you get your notes out. I think you're going to really be inspired by how Ara reflects on how she got to where she is today. I love to see you guys screenshotting and posting on social. We are Dreams and Drive across the board on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And remember, guys, make sure that you're subscribed wherever you're listening. And if you want to join our weekly newsletter and get our email newsletter, The Keys, you can sign up by going to dreamsanddrive.com/join. All right, let's dive into this conversation with Ara.
Hey there, glad to be here.
I am glad to have you on. You are my Princeton comrade. Is that the right word, comrade? A fellow alum, right?
Sure.
I'm excited for us to start telling stories. I feel like on the show, I've really focused a lot on people who are entrepreneurs 100%. But I think hearing about how you were able to build your career story and also your own personal brand and also still be a creative and an artist. I'm really excited for our dream drivers to be able to learn more about your life and how they can pursue their passions and build a career as well.
Yeah, let's dive in.
So, I love to get started by going back in time, right? Okay. So people listening in, they know that I'm a, Orange, New Jersey girl, and you are actually from West Orange. So Yep. Tell us what was inspiring the young Ara growing up in West Orange, New Jersey.
So West Orange, I grew up in the 80s. So I'm a child of the 80s. And, my wife and I like to say when we were little, we were busy. I really liked Richard Scarry books. So for those of you who don't know Richard Scarry, he did a lot with animals, but basically like, what do people do all day? And I was fascinated by that. My parents took me to work with them. My mom is a physician. My dad is an entrepreneur, graphic designer who had a marketing communications firm. My grandmother, who's no longer with us, but she used to drive me to the bank, do errands. So I was just really curious about all things work. I remember I used to like put little checks in a briefcase and walk around, and I said I was a tax collector. I don't really know what that meant, but
That is so funny.
my dad came to our class in elementary school, and we all got to make business cards with logos that specified what we would be doing when we grew up. Mine had a Red Cross on it. So I don't know. I thought maybe I'd be an ambulance driver. I don't know what I was thinking, but all to say, I was inspired by the world of work, and I couldn't wait to get started.
So I know you said that you had a Red Cross sticker on yours, but what was the dream for you as a young kid? Did you eventually get a sense of what you wanted to do later in life, or what you thought you wanted to do?
I think I went through a lot of different iterations. I was trying to think about this. I love the title of your show, Dreams and Drive. And I was like, what was I dreaming about? And I don't think I had like, I'm going to be an X when I grow up. I think that didn't happen until I was, asked, right? Like, I think in high school, I was part of the Essex County chapter of the Lynx debutante cotillion, and it was partially a leadership program. And I remember saying, I want to either be a screenwriter or a psychologist. And I went to Princeton kind of thinking that I, could pursue either or both. But when I was younger, I think I really just wanted to be in the mix, honestly. Like, I liked learning what other people were doing. I went to a Montessori nursery school, so a lot of that was around like self-guided learning and working in teams and just being a team player. I loved collaborating on group projects. I had a party planning business. We did one birthday party. It was my little sister Alexis's. So there was a lot. We
would have been friends growing up. If we grew up the same time, we definitely would have been friends, because I did a lot of that stuff as well.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, like that's the joy of childhood. And I guess the one thing that I tried to carry into my adult life is that sense of play and possibility. And that was something that I saw modeled with my parents. I never felt like they had to do the work that they were doing. I felt like they wanted to. And when they didn't want to, they gave themselves permission to pivot and find something else. So I feel like play is very, very important to people of all ages.
Was there ever any pressure from them for you to succeed, especially going to a school like Princeton?
I think in my family, there wasn't even a question. It was kind of like, you're going to do your best and we're going to help you. If that means that you have to get a tutor or you have to take a lesson, like enrichment was really important. So I liked the idea of knowing that even if you don't know something today, there are probably resources out there for you to learn it and get better tomorrow. And you may not ever be the best, but you should be your personal best always.
So let's talk about college, because I think that's something that's always a pivotal moment for a lot of us, right? Going into college, let's frame the question this way, right? Going into college, you thought, right? And then after graduation, you realized. Tell me that. How would you answer that?
Before going to college, I thought I would have all of the answers. I would be a grown-up when I graduated. And by the time I graduated, I realized that I was just getting started.
Ooh, I love that. You were just getting started. So what did life look like for, young Ara just getting started?
So young Ara just getting started was going off to law school. And to be quite honest, wasn't quite sure why she was doing that. I was an art history and visual arts major at Princeton. And I also was the sales director of the radio station, which I hope you listen to at some point. I know we talked about this.
Yeah.
103.3 FM WPRB. And so for me, going to law school was an opportunity to think about, how do you translate a love of storytelling, which is what I clearly loved all throughout growing up. My parents were often like, is this a real story you're telling me about school, or is this one you made up? How did I take that and translate it into being a successful professional? And as you know, my career has gone through a few iterations, but that first one as a lawyer was really learning about how do you tell the story of a corporation or a company at any stage, whether it's a founder who just has an inkling of an idea and is just starting to get financing, all the way up through those more mature companies that have been public for a really long time that we're all familiar with. But they're all trying to tell a story. And I think for me, that was really enlightening in terms of how I could help contribute to that.
In the first chapter of this story that you were telling about yourself, right, your legal career, what were some of the things you were learning about, what it took for you personally to feel fulfilled?
Yeah. So that's a very important question you're asking. And I think it builds on some of the things you and I were just talking about childhood. I realized that academically and intellectually, I was learning a lot and was being challenged, and I would probably continue to be because, in a professional services world where you have lots of clients, no day is the same, no problem is the same. But for me, I just didn't feel that fire, and I had been accustomed, and I guess that's a privilege, right? Like I felt challenged and excited about school. I loved learning, and I just felt like that shouldn't have to stop just because I'm working. And so I really had to sit with myself and say, if this is the thing that you're going to do, forget the next 5 years, for the next 5 minutes, 5 hours, is it really the best thing? Is it really your highest and best use? And is it really your purpose? And so I had to take a step back and rethink some things because I realized I wasn't truly fulfilled.
What did you decide to do once realizing you weren't?
I don't know if I decided so much as people talk about networking, right? And I want to talk about that a little bit in terms of I didn't know what the next step was going to be. I didn't have a clear cut, the next job I want to do is X and let me apply to that job. So I really had to do a little bit of reverse engineering. I spoke to a lot of different people. I narrowed it down to lawyers who weren't practicing law, including one of the lawyers at the law firm who'd been brought on to do a role that's very similar to what I do today, but really focusing on that end-to-end journey for attorneys. And I also spoke to people in higher ed, again, lawyers who weren't practicing because I really enjoyed my higher ed experience. And I thought maybe a university, maybe that makes sense. And so in the process of talking to people about what I was interested in and trying to be very honest with them about it, I ended up landing a position at Princeton, first in the provost's office, and then eventually in the provost and executive vice president's offices, learning a lot about academic and administrative work at a university and kind of translating my client service experience as a lawyer into that client-obsessed mindset that it takes to collaborate and build consensus across a university.
Not all of us get that opportunity to have like a revelation for what's next. You know what I mean?
Right.
In our lives. So throughout the time at Princeton, I know you eventually left.
Yep.
What were you finding? Like, did you see yourself doing this long term, or was there an inkling in you to try something different eventually?
So when I was working at the university, I had to do a little bit of a decompression from coming from a law firm. And even though I hadn't practiced law for very long, it was just shy of 2 years. There's something about working in a law firm with billable hours, right, where we were measuring our time in increments of, I think, 6 minutes at the time. And I remember first getting to Princeton and realizing that I was writing things down every day, sort of like religiously, like from 1 to 106, I did this and I did that. And then I realized nobody was asking me for that information. Everybody was just like, what outcome are we trying to reach? And how did you help us contribute to the outcome? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, the 30,000 foot view. Yes, I need to get back to that. And, Raina, I loved working at Princeton because, as you know, as an alum, it's a vast organization. There's so many opportunities. And for me, kind of being at the center of it all, I was learning about, what it takes to operate a university. How do you think about priority setting when the economy is good? How do you think about that when the economy is not so great? The importance of being very mission driven, but also acknowledging that the world changes every day and you have to think about how does the institution change along with it. And just some really interesting questions about, what is the place of a university like Princeton that has so much to offer to the world, but only to a certain finite amount of students? How do you encourage those students to go out and be in service to others? And so I think I would have done that quite happily for a very long time, except a few things happened. One, 2008, the economy crashed and I got a phone call. I didn't expect to say those two sentences in the same breath, especially the phone call was about a job possibility back at the law firm. And it was looking at becoming their first sort of official diversity director, so their head of diversity and inclusion. And I think for me, I was a little bit caught off guard by even the opportunity, because in 2008, even though I had spent all of college, most of high school, really grappling with my own identity and using my time at Princeton to really work through that academically, I did a documentary called Black Like Us about the lives of, intergenerational affluent Black Americans, mainly in Northern New Jersey. And then my senior thesis was about the public and private spaces of coming out as LGBT. So identity was not something I was unfamiliar with. And even in law school and in corporate law, corporate governance, and this idea of cognitive diversity being incredibly important to board performance. But I had never thought about it as a job, right? Like a function. And so when they called and started talking to me, I was a little bit, I guess I had a healthy dose of skepticism that comes when you're happy with what you're doing, right? Like my stepmom always says, don't run away from something, run towards something. And I was able to ask the kinds of questions that I needed in order to feel like that was a good next step for me.
What were those questions? I think there might be people listening in who, like you said, may feel content at a current position, right? And an opportunity comes knocking and they, number one, may fear what will happen if they do say yes, right? Or they're unable to imagine how the possibility will unfold. So could you give us some of those, or would you mind sharing some of those guiding questions that you use to assess why you should move forward?
Yeah. And I think you just nailed one of them, which is, moving forward. So in my career, I've always tried to have a sense of forward momentum and trying not to do the same thing again somewhere else, right? Like trying to work through the things that I'm trying to learn in a position at a place and then move to something different. So for me at that time, if I can go back in my way back machine, I think one of my biggest questions was around what kind of influence will I truly have and how will you organizationally make sure that's the case? Now, I'm sure I wasn't that articulate. I think I was kind of like, so where am I going to be sitting? Who am I going to be reporting to? But I think if I look back, what I was most interested in was, because I had been a junior associate at a corporate law firm, as well as working at Princeton, I'd had this really great experience of working with a lot of decision makers. So whether it was CEOs or CFOs at, early or mid-stage companies, whether it was the provost or the president or the executive vice president or the faculty, all of the members who run Princeton, I enjoyed that because I enjoyed feeling like my inputs would matter and have immediate impact. And what I didn't want to do was go into a position where I would lose that. And so that question was answered satisfactorily for me. It was, you're going to report to the chair of the law firm and you're really going to be integrated into all that we're trying to do, not just from a talent perspective or a culture perspective, but also from a business as well as our external presence. And so for me, that was important. And I say for me, because for all of you listening, there may be different things that motivate you. And, it's just sort of knowing those things and being able to ask questions that help you assess, okay, if I'm doing this on a regular basis, will my need for, say, recognition be met? Will my need for influence or my need for affiliation, being part of a big team or a group, does tradition matter? So these are things over time, but I would say the biggest things were, will I be of service? Will I get to try to do something that no one else has done? And will I be able to actually make an impact on the organization?
I like that you mentioned that, but the thing that I'm wondering as well is, while we're So you were at this point, you were about, would you say 7 years postgraduate when this happened? Because
Yep.
okay, yeah. How are you also making sure, because you mentioned, your work in identity and you study art history and visual arts at Princeton. So you also had passions outside of this career that you were intentionally moving forward, right?
Yep.
How were you making sure that you weren't losing this other side of who you were, right? Because I feel like sometimes and I'll say black, I don't want to say black people, but sometimes we feel like we have to sacrifice one for the other, right? How are you navigating that? You're still pretty young. I'm guessing you're in your late 20s by now, right? How was that for you?
So. Yeah. I had some good role models, and not just my parents. So when I was in college and then, I guess the point where I was working at the law firm and then when I left, my girlfriend at the time was an admission officer at Princeton. And I remember one of the things I knew about why I wasn't so interested in my job as a lawyer was, I would go with her on trips to speak to students, right, at, schools, do school visits. And I just remember being so jazzed about that, so excited. And that was my vacation time, right? Like I was like, can we go on another school visit? And so I was just sort of minding my energy, right? And then my little sister, one of them was a class of '08 at Princeton, and she was in DZAC, which is a dance group.
I was in BFD.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Love it. And I remember, and she and my girlfriend at the time were both in the same dance group. And I remember I would love just sitting and watching rehearsals and helping, give notes. I'm not a dancer, so my notes were very probably unhelpful. But, it was kind of one of these things where it was almost like continuing that college mindset, even after I left, where you're doing a zillion things. Like I remember my first summer as a summer associate at the law firm, it was like my first weekend. And I realized, oh my goodness, I don't really have that much to do. Whereas when you're a student, it's like you don't have class, but you've got, you had BAC, there was DZAC. For me, it was club tennis, there was the radio station. So I was still looking for like things to fill my minutes. And I was realizing I didn't want all of my minutes to be filled with my job, no matter what I did. So I had to get intentional. I mentioned vacations. So when I wasn't, going to school visits, I realized that, writing is important to me. So I started looking at writers' conferences and retreats. And I would actually, instead of taking a vacation and going, say, to Florida just to like sit out in the sun, I would I went to Breadloaf, 3 different sessions, and I would go up there, and that would be my vacation.
What's Breadloaf for people who may not know?
So Breadloaf is a writers' conference that happens annually, usually in Vermont, but I also had an occasion to go. They did a program in Sicily, and that was amazing. So integrating things that you love into the free time that you have. Also, when I worked at Princeton, I took advantage of, I guess it was a pretty specific perk, but I took a class. I audited a class while I was there. And for me now, even now, my wife is a painter. And when we go on vacation, we go on vacations where she can paint and I can write. And it's really important to us. So we think about like, where are we going and how does that help us sort of creatively recharge? And then also, physical health is really important to us. So we like to hike when we can. So we look for places that can accommodate both.
Hey Dream Drivers, as a new mom, my shower time is also much needed me time and self-care time. It's one of the few spaces to get those must-have moments for mind and body. Plus, feeling my best helps me reach my fullest potential for the day. When you look good, you smell good, you are ready to do good. That's why I love Olay Body Exfoliating and Moisturizing Body Wash with sugar, cocoa butter, and vitamin B3. Some of the things I love about this product is that it's made with cocoa butter, which feels ultra nourishing to your skin. Also, you don't have to worry about the oily coated feeling or harsh feeling exfoliation because this body wash rinses clean and is gentle enough for everyday use. Plus, you can have a lot of trust that this product works. Olay's 65 years of beauty science is incorporated into this product with body care designed by skin experts to improve the look and feel of your skin from head to toe. You definitely need to give these Olay body washes a try. They completely changed how I thought about my body care routine in my shower. As I said, shower time is precious, so I invest in the best. You can find Olay body products in store or online. Olay Body, fearless in my skin. Okay, I love that you mentioned that. Thank you. I think it gives hope to people who think that they have to sacrifice. There definitely are ways that you can make that both of your worlds, or however many worlds you have, right, can coexist in one. Because I think sometimes there's this idea that we have to be monolith in our passions and our desires, right? Because one of the things that for people who may not know, Ara and I connected before this call, right? Just on a general, let's network, let's get to know each other. And one of the things I remember that you mentioned to me was how you got into the diversity and inclusion industry as it was itself pretty new, right?
Right.
So what were the things that you were learning about how you could create a place for yourself within this industry that really highlighted your skill sets and your strength? Like, how were you navigating as this industry or as this sector within companies was unfolding?
Yep. Thank you for that question, because I think it's a good one to always think about your strengths and really how do you add to something instead of trying to fit into something.
Mm-hmm.
Always, thinking with abundance. I didn't know it. Again, this is one of these hindsight is 2020. But because I had a corporate law bent, I was a little bit, I wouldn't say I was an odd person out, but a lot of people at the time were people who had backgrounds in labor and employment. And so I was approaching even the concept a little bit differently. I was thinking about it in terms of cognitive diversity. I mentioned that in terms of corporate boards, but this idea of how do you unlock the best contributions in anyone, and how do you ensure that you're very clear and intentional about your language? My team knows this, but my big bugaboo is when you refer to somebody as a diverse person, right? This idea that we're actually not diverse until we're in a group. And so helping people understand that, you bring something individual to the table, and organizations' opportunities are to create inclusive spaces where people feel comfortable doing so and feel like they can opt into whatever that difference is that they're going to bring, and not have it be prescribed by something that might just be what they were born with, right? So I think that was one of them. I think the other thing that I was really focused on, I mentioned, and the law firm I worked for was really helpful in this, is really integrating D&I into all that we did. So if we were thinking about, let's just say in a law firm setting, assignments, right? Like who you work for in terms of the client, the partners with whom you build relationships, like all of those things matter, the types of work you're doing. And so thinking about how did you build a better mousetrap, right? When it came to the assignment process. So focusing both on process and systems in addition to people, as opposed to always feeling like you have to fix the people in order for things to get better. So for me, those were two of the things that I focused a lot on. And then just acknowledging, because as I was in the law firm context, and that was my quote unquote primary client, I did have an opportunity to speak to a lot of different clients of the firm and really learn about the different contexts in which organizations were trying to do this thing called D&I better, faster, and realizing that if you don't take the time to think about the context in which the work is being done, you can rush to take a lot of shortcuts that might feel good, but that might not be sustainable over time.
Okay. Was there ever any challenge, though, as you're finding out your place within this sector, in these jobs, right? You worked at Morgan Stanley. Was there ever a time where you were maybe doubted whether this was for you?
I'm laughing because it's, I was talking to a colleague, it's hard work, D&I is hard work. And because I'm somebody who didn't necessarily wake up and say, this is what I want to be when I grow up, or even when I got the phone call, it wasn't a phone call I was sort of hunting for when I was asked to sort of step into that space.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that I learned over time is that it's very hard, particularly as a Black woman. I would say the LGBT part of it, the lesbian part for me has been less so. I think because in some ways when people see me, it's easier to see that I'm a Black woman. And there's a lot being written about Black women, and there has been over time. And I think for me, I had to really learn about separating sort of my professional work from my personal experiences. And there was sort of an armor that I didn't necessarily realize I was putting on. And it can be wearing. And that's just my experience. I don't know how others do this work, but for me, after a number of years doing it, I felt tired. And I realized that I needed to think about what could I use that experience to translate and to do something different. And I didn't quite know what that different was. And that was scary because, as you said, I had this momentum. I'd found this thing that I was doing. And there was a moment where I was like, I'm not sure what the next step is. And that's where I had to sort of go back to sort of those first principles of forget the job and think about when I wake up, what am I excited about doing? When I wake up, what do I wish I never had to do again? And starting to be more intentional about speaking about that, to people I met, to people I didn't meet, and just writing it down. And that's when I got the call from Audible. And it was something different. It was to head up employee experience. And it didn't actually have anything specific with D&I in it. But what I did is I took my experiences of thinking about how do you build organizations that are more inclusive, that are more welcoming, that make people feel like they belong, and was able to translate that into the employee experience work, which at the time we were very focused on the new hire experience. So what better moment in any employee's journey, right? Mm-hmm. You want to walk in on that first day or that time you accept that offer and say, wow, you've been waiting for me and me specifically, and you know who I am, and I'm going to be excited to tell you more about what I can do.
So I want to just make sure that we don't lose something that I think was really important about what you said. You mentioned feeling like you had an armor that you didn't realize you had up, right? What exactly was that armor that you were carrying around?
I've always wanted to be a good girl, right? And I wish I could say a good person, but I think it was really about not making a mess, not being too loud, not, just coloring within the lines, even though I mentioned the sense of play and creativity. Princeton was a really important place for me where I got a little messy. The idea of doing a senior thesis exhibit that's so public about my experience coming out and about those of my friends who agreed to be interviewed, that was sort of my first moment of realizing that my voice was going to be my own no matter what. And I had a choice to either make it the voice I wanted it to be or the one I thought others wanted it to be. And Princeton was just such a wonderful place in terms of feeling so free to be so many different aspects of myself. And I think that was really helpful to draw upon later on when there were moments when I might have lost that, confidence or that sense of safety. And I think that for me, it's just checking back in with that self, with those people from that time, from those writings, and just thinking about, wow, when you really take risks, Ara, like that's when the interesting stuff happens.
Oh, I love that. That is going to be a quote for this episode. When you take risks, that's when the interesting things happen. And I also think people are watching you, right? And you may not even know, because the thing you mentioned is you got the call from Audible. What do you think led, or let me rephrase that question, right? A lot of us are waiting for that call, right? Mm-hmm. How do you think we can make sure that we are ready when we receive the call?
These are very important questions you're asking. You and I talked about this a little bit. I think about manifestation, lowercase m. Mm-hmm. I think about the energy that we put out is something that others can receive, whether it's conscious or not. And I think that the more honest we are with ourselves, the more honest we're able to be when we don't even know people are watching. right? So I didn't necessarily have LinkedIn. I didn't even really think about LinkedIn until I was in this role. And I realized it's important to, be out there and let people know who you are and hopefully know that you can join a place like Audible and be yourself. But I think my dad asked me a really critical question when I applied to jobs when I was in law school. He said, "Are you going to be out on your resume?" And he didn't mean it with any malice. He was just genuinely curious. And I said to him, I said, "Of course, I wouldn't want to join a place that wouldn't want all of me." And I said that then, but I forget it every now and then, and I have to remind myself. So I think one of the things to be ready is to be ready with your whole self. And I know people say that a lot, bring your whole self, but like, honestly, think about like, who's the you that you really want the world to see? Who's the you that's going to contribute the most to this world? Because we really only get one shot at that. And I think it's also being willing to let opportunities go by and pass because they don't feel quite right. It's like Goldilocks,
Mm-hmm.
You kind of know when something's not quite right. And sometimes you feel like, well, it's the only call I've gotten in 5 years. Maybe I better take it. And I remember that kind of happened to me right before Audible. I was approached with an opportunity. And essentially, it was my wife who said, "Ara, that's like the exact same thing you've done. That would be going backwards." And I said, "You're right." And I hadn't even thought of it that way. So I think checking in with the people you trust, being ready to say no. And then once you do say yes, being willing to be courageous to really be the you that, put out the call in the first place.
Did you feel like going into the role at Audible? So I just want to make sure you entered Audible as your role was head of employee experience, right? Did you feel like you had room to innovate, or did you kind of just say, all right, let me see how they're doing things and I'll interject my perspective later on? How did you go into this new role given all of your previous background and experience? Because a lot of us who may be listening, right? We get these opportunities that could be life-changing, but then we don't know what to do with it once we're there, right?
Right. And I wouldn't say I'm necessarily the expert, but what I tried to do in any new situation, whether it's a meeting, a seminar, like a conference where you'll see people once, like I try to actively listen and participate. And I think the same thing goes for a new role. I think that I was fortunate because it was a new role that had never been done at Audible before. And employee experience was like D&I at the time I entered. Very few people were talking about it in any specific way. It was kind of yours to create. And that's kind of my thing. I like to go in and create things from not scratch, but necessarily like having a pretty blank slate. And so that was kind of my charge. It was like, we're hiring you to be innovative, to be creative. But that's the ethos at Audible that I enjoy, is it's so entrepreneurial, and it's like, it's not about, yes, it's about like, yes, and so much more can come, I think though, part of innovating is listening. And so I would encourage people, even when you're in something new that you feel like you've done a zillion times, because I acknowledge some people will, continue to do roles in progressively bigger and bigger places, same things. Take some time to listen and find out what's going on in that context, because what I mentioned before, context matters. And people will tell you things that you might not have been expecting to hear that allow you to connect the dots in a much more interesting way than you might have if you just charged in and wanted to prove yourself right off the bat.
Now, I have a question, though. I think people, they look at your LinkedIn, they can see that you were promoted, right, several times within Audible. And a lot of times we may not know how to navigate that. What do you think were the things that you were doing, or what are some tips that you could have for our listeners who love the company they're at, love the job that they're doing, but no, there is some growth strategy. They want to be able to grow in their careers as well. How did you do it, and what tips would you have for others?
Yeah, I think, there were moments where I saw opportunities and I had a chance to raise my hand and say, "Hey, I'm willing to take on more. Let me show you how. Let me, talk to you about what I can do." Because I think sometimes we want people to come to us, or feel like if they don't come to us, then that means the opportunity is not going to happen, or there's something wrong, or we've been passed over. And I would just encourage people to be as forthright as they can. Now, every company has a different culture around growth and advancement. And that's one of the things that you should, way before you're thinking about being, at the next level, just understanding how that works, so that you can have honest conversations with your manager, with your informal advisors, with people around you, to figure out, how can I be ready and who can help me get ready? Because that was one of the things is, sometimes you get to grow on the job. Sometimes you need to, take advantage of outside resources or advice. And I think it's just becoming sort of that performance mindset of, we can always improve, we can always be better, and we can always acknowledge the systems in which we're working, and really be clear on what the rules are, whether they're written or unwritten, and really just getting different perspectives. Like when I was at the law firm, one of my really great friends to this day, he and I are very similar, but we're also very different. I mean, he's a straight white male, and he and I used to have some very provocative conversations around performance and how we thought about our own performance. And it just helped open up a lens for me of how different people think about things, and remembering that the ways that I think about things are not the only ways to think about things. So I guess it's saying, have a broad and deep and diverse network of people upon whom you can rely when you have tough questions or interesting ones.
I love that. I'm interested to now know, right? We talked about how you were infusing your passions earlier in your career. What was art, and how are you also prioritizing your art, your role as a creative, and your own personal interests now, especially because the job that you're doing at Audible, I'm guessing was, takes up a lot of your time. How did you navigate that?
Yeah. So in some ways, I miss the commute a lot, because when after I left the law firm and went to Morgan Stanley, you mentioned Morgan Stanley, the stop between the law firm and Audible, it was also my first time being back in New York City. I had moved out of the city after going to NYU for law school, and was living in Princeton. And when I met my wife, we were dating at the time, and she said, "I'm not going to move to New Jersey." And I said, "Okay, I'll move to Brooklyn." And I remember commuting to Morgan Stanley and being on the subway, and I just needed something to sort of take my mind off of that. So I started writing these little vignettes on my iPhone, and I would send them to Hillary, every morning when I got to the office, so she would know I got there. And then when I got home, I would send her sort of the one I did on the way home. And I remember one day I didn't send it to her, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "What do you mean, am I okay?" She said, "Well, you didn't send your writing for the day." And it was great to have that accountability partner. And those vignettes eventually became a novel, How to Raise an Art Star. And I'm looking for an agent, so I'm putting that out there. But I think it was finding the spaces, even in those crushes of time where you don't think you have any time or space.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was like, I've got to write. If I don't do it now, I'm not going to do it. And if I don't do it, then that's like one of the things I was put on this earth to do, and I'm not honoring that. So for me, it was kind of built in. And now, on the weekends, her studio, even pre-pandemic, was in our apartment. We designed our apartment so she could have a home studio. And so often on the weekends, you'll find her in the studio painting, and I'm on the other side of the apartment with the cat writing. And for us, it's, it works. It doesn't work for everyone, but we've really prioritized creativity as one of those things that must take up a significant amount of our time together and apart.
You were mentioning to me when we first chatted about how your dad's role in you embracing culture, right? And I know you said you grew up in Newark, and how the place inspired so much. Can you talk to me about how your parents' influence you think really has influenced your, I'll call it, your dream driving journey to date?
Well, they drove me to a lot of lessons and tennis matches and, camps. So they were literally in the driver's seat for a lot of my dreams. But, my dad actually recently, what I love about my parents is they are always learning and growing and trading tips. And, my mom was on a a panel for Cornell where she's an alum and a trustee. And, we were just talking about being on panels. My dad has a podcast about Newark, and he asked me to co-host so I could guest host and interview him. And we talked a lot about his art experience and mine. And I think that, in addition to all of the really, great things they did just in terms of sacrificing so that I could have, they just showed me how to live a life that is integrated. I think my stepmom early on said, forget balance, just try happiness. And I've tried to live with that is, it's easy to get sucked into just doing a lot of things. But if you're not deriving joy from it, then you're just doing a lot of things. So I've tried to really figure out, like, how can I make the most of the things I really want to do? And I think my parents early on encouraged that, and to this day are role modeling it. So they've been putting their dreams in drive for a long time, and I've just been trying to catch up to them.
Is that something that you also see at in the recruitment process at Audible? You probably heard it from people, hiring manager, recruiters. Do you feel like applicants nowadays are like, what do you think is the biggest trend that you're seeing now? I know it's a COVID time, so it's in a pandemic, so things are definitely different as well. But what's the trend that you're seeing within applications now, or just from what's the temperature of the candidate process right now? Like, what do you feel like candidates are really stressing about that you kind of wish they wouldn't, or that you wish they might shift their perspective on? I'm just wondering, from a hiring perspective, or from overseeing talent and culture at a company like Audible, do you feel like there's a bug in the air when it comes to people who are looking for jobs? Or I'm just wondering.
I won't necessarily speak for Audible specifically. I mean, I will say 2020 obviously was a challenging year on so many levels for so many people across the globe, and it continues to be. And I think that, companies like ours have just tried our best to keep a close ear, right, to the ground. I mean, listening is what we do. Listening and understanding what are the things that we as an organization can control, what are the things we can't. And similarly for our employees, with managers, really thinking about keeping that dialogue open. What does true flexibility look like? What does true vulnerability and authenticity look like? What is a safe space when you're in a place that we as an organization can't necessarily control for you, which is your home, right? So I think when I read and I think about, the future of work, a lot of it is around, what does place mean to us? What are spaces? Are they digital? Are they physical? Are they somewhere in between? What are the things that are going to either open up or close opportunity for groups of people? You read a lot about women right now and caregiving. How do we make caregiving a more inclusive proposition? How do we think about racial equity and justice? How do we even think about current events, right? Like, how do we know when we need to talk about things that we see in the news, or that we see in our streets, or we see in our communities? It's just such a blurring. And I think for me, the bad news is I've always tried to have my dreams and drive be ones that are not, so compartmentalized. And so this idea of the personal and the professional and the political, all of it blending, is not necessarily foreign, but what I would say is this idea of disconnecting, and how do we signal what disconnecting looks like when we're also tethered to our devices and our homes right now. That's the thing I worry or think about a lot.
Yeah, and it's hard to predict, because a year ago we were just entering the lockdown. Some people say, "Oh, I knew it was gonna be a year," but I really thought it was just gonna be a few months. Like, oh, by May we'll be good. Like, this will just be like the flu. People will get over it, right? But realizing just how much can change in a year, and just how much our lives can change in a year, is something that I think a lot of us have come to realize. Thinking ahead for you, Ara, what's the next chapter of your book? Right? If you were to, let's say, you're writing, this is chapter 9, right? And you're writing chapter 10. what do you think, or what do you want that chapter to include?
One of the things is I do hope that my own journey is instructive and helpful for others. And I want to make sure that chapter 10 is very much about sharing as much as I can, whenever I can, about my journey so that others, can put their dreams in drive, right? I feel like I've gained some lessons learned. And I also enjoy learning from others. And so I really want to make sure that I continue to be in a generative space where people feel comfortable sharing their stories with me, but also curious to ask me about mine. I mentioned that novel that I wrote on that commute, back in 2014. I would love for it to find a home in the world. I would love my character, who's a very much an enterprising little girl, biracial orphan from LA who comes to New York, who's very entrepreneurial. And I think very much an expression of that little girl that I was growing up in West Orange. I'd love for her to find a home along with her friends, because I think that tells a story that isn't often told by someone like me, right? I don't think Black women always get the freedom to express stories as broadly or as generally. And this is a feel-good, interesting story about what it means to be a family, an interracial family in Brooklyn with lots of aspirations and ambition colliding, but with love at the center of it. So I'd hope that that finds a home. And then, Raina, I just want to keep having fun. I just want to keep playing. I just want to keep challenging myself and growing. So I think chapter 10, a lot of that work continues.
And it goes back to that's something that you mentioned was something you enjoyed even from a kid, right? You were always fascinated about the world of work, but you also had this play and this sense of possibility. So it's funny how things come full circle, right? Or how things never leave you, I should say.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. Wherever you go, there you are. And so a lot of it, I haven't mentioned mental health, but I credit some very good therapists in terms of really helping me, know what I'm up to most of the time, right? Like you can fool a lot of people, but you can't usually fool yourself. And so checking in and being very clear about, at any given moment, what do I want? What's getting in the way? How can I help myself? How can I ask for help, which is something I'm not great at and I'm trying to get better. And how do I take care of myself? How do I really, as you said, like kind of disconnect and press pause and rejuvenate so that I can actually be useful, not only to others, but to myself.
Thank you. Ara. I think that our dream drivers definitely, I know I walked away, even from our first conversation that we had. One of the things that I get from our conversation is the ability or the need and being intentional about looking inward, right? For a lot of us, that looking inward can be scary, right? So I just thank you for inspiring me to continue to do that.
Yeah, it's a lifelong process, and you're right to call it out. It is and can be very scary. And so, if you can have the courage, I know you have a little one. One of my favorite books growing up was, the monster at the end of this book, starring the lovable Grover, something like that. I messed it up, but it was basically like, don't turn this page. There's a monster at the end of this book. And basically at the end, I won't spoil it for all the little ones, but Grover is the monster at the end of the book. So not so scary, but we can get scared along the way.
So, Ara, in order to be a dream driver, you have to have your keys to success, right? So what do you think are 3 things that every dream driver needs in their toolkit before they hit the road?
They need their equivalent of trail mix. So whatever it is that fuels you, whether it's other people, whether it's music, whether it's another hobby, like keep that fuel in reserve, because the tank can run empty before you know it. I think having some co-passengers or pilots, along the way, both to memorialize and document in a way that you can't because you're living it, but also to offer some different paths, different scenic routes that you might want to take instead of the most direct one that you would tell yourself. And then I think, The make and the model, I know I'm using the car analogy.
I love it. I love it, though. I love it.
you open the door, I'll drive through it. But no, seriously, the make and the model, like when I was in high school, I drove this little used Ford Escort. And it barely accelerated, in West Orange, 280 is a hilly highway. And it kept me safe. It got me to school. And, eventually I upgraded to some SUVs, but again, what you start driving isn't the thing you end driving. And so don't get so fixated on the make or the model or what other people have. Just do you. Just drive your car, just drive your car, drive your route, and know that you're doing the best you can.
Oh, that was such a great soundbite to end on, Ara. I am just so appreciative for this conversation, and I hope that our dream drivers are as inspired as I was by this conversation. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. I love this concept, and I'm so proud of you for, really putting it in gear for all these years. What episode are you up to now?
So at the time of recording, I just released episode 259.
That's wonderful.
And as listeners may hear that I realized that, you can spend a lot of time complaining about you don't know how to do something or you just figure it out. And the biggest hurdle for me lately has been, how do I do these interviews now? And I have a child who's on the move and he's, he just doesn't sit still and look back at you all day now, right? He's all like trying to scoot and climbing over me. But I realized that, I'll find a way to make it done. I'll mute it in between, while my guests are talking, but I don't want to give up on this passion of mine while I'm figuring out my next step. So thank you for holding space for me and Axel to do this interview.
Thanks to Axel for joining in.
All right, so that's a wrap for episode 267 with Ara Tucker. I hope you enjoyed hearing her dream driving journey as well as her keys to success. You guys, if you enjoyed this episode, you know what I'm going to say. Please make sure that you are sharing it with your communities. You can find us across the board, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are Dreams and Drive, and you can use the hashtag Dreams and Drive when sharing as well. I love to see you guys screenshotting these episodes, posting it on LinkedIn, Facebook, tagging me. I'm always on social media trying to engage back and making sure that I'm amplifying everything that you're already saying about these episodes. If you haven't already, make sure that you're subscribed so that you get notifications every time we have a new episode. If this is your first time listening, there are a bunch of episodes that I encourage you guys to go back and listen to. And remember that for the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about all things career, all things shifting what I think I have been putting out there is what it means to be a dream driver. For anyone who doesn't want to be an entrepreneur, someone who really wants to excel down a certain career path, someone who's building a name for themselves at a corporate company, along a non-traditional career path, these next few episodes are all about you. So I want to make sure that you are getting notifications that you are really enjoying this content. Remember, if you want to be part of our Dreams and Drive online newsletter, our email newsletter actually, and get our weekly newsletter, The Keys, you can sign up by going to dreamsanddrive.com/join. That's dreamsanddrive.com/join. And if anybody's interested in buying Dreams and Drive merchandise, we have crew necks and t-shirts available. Just go to dreamsanddrive.com/shop. That's dreamsanddrive.com/shop to get your tee, purchase it, and start rocking your Dreams and Drive gear in person. So next up on our roster, we're going to be speaking to a reality TV show executive, Selena Rochester. She will be our episode 268 guest. I hope you guys have that marked in your calendars for next week. Keep dreaming, keep driving, and we'll chat again soon. Bye, guys.